The political conflict between the Kremlin and Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov is rapidly escalating. According to analysts, if agreements with the Chechen clan are broken, Russia could face a Third Chechen War, which would develop into a civil war with elements of anti-colonialist resistance. The confrontation between the federal government and Chechnya has long ceased to be just a backroom topic. With each passing month, signs of a political crisis in relations between Moscow and Grozny are growing. As analysts warn, this is no longer just an internal Russian conflict, but a system ready to explode. Russian analyst Anatoly Nesmiyan, in his commentary to the publication of Important Stories, emphasized that the probability of a new Chechen war was never zero. Peace in the region, according to him, was initially built on a deal with one side of the internal Chechen conflict. And if this agreement in the person of Ramzan Kadyrov and his clan is destroyed, then a new escalation in Chechnya is inevitable. Nesmiyan believes that this conflict will very quickly go beyond the local, turning into a full-fledged anti-colonialist war. Relations between Chechnya and Russia, he says, are a colonial model with dependence on the local loyal administration. If it disappears or loses Moscow's support, a power vacuum will arise, which will inevitably lead to an attempt at legitimization through a fight with the federal center. Kadyrov's deteriorating health, which Novaya Gazeta Europe wrote about earlier, has increased instability. The Chechen leader appears in public less and less often, and his speech has changed noticeably. Against the backdrop of weak federal control and a possible change of leader, guarantees for the continuation of the previous vertical are rapidly disappearing. If the current agreement between the Kremlin and Grozny collapses, the new phase of the conflict will not simply repeat the two previous Chechen wars. It will be civil in nature and will affect not only Chechnya, but also other republics of the North Caucasus, where similar sentiments have long been brewing. Russia risks entering into a new, large-scale internal war at a time when the state's resources are depleted and trust in the center is falling.
Hero of Russia Major Murat Tibilov has been killed in fighting in Russia's Kursk region, local media reported on Friday. According to the Russian media, he was performing a combat mission in the region. A month ago, Tibilov received the Gold Star of Hero of Russia from President Vladimir Putin and had been involved in Russia's full-fledged invasion of Ukraine since February 2022. In 2022, he was awarded 2 Orders of Courage. Acting Governor of Kursk region Alexander Kinstein said that Tibilov was among those who participated in thwarting Ukrainian incursion on January 5. It was the Rosgvardia crews who managed to disable the first enemy tank, which played a huge role in the further development of the battle and the defeat of the enemy, Kinstein wrote on his Telegram channel. Major Murat Tibilov was a Special Forces officer of the service. It should be noted that Kursk has been the focal point of fighting recently, with Russia aiming to return territories captured by Ukraine following cross-border incursion since last August.
About 13 square kilometers of the Belgorod region of the Russian Federation are in the grey zone. That is, they are not controlled by either side. This was stated on air by former employee of the Security Service of Ukraine, military expert Ivan Stupak, on Radio NV. We know, in fact, that the Ukrainian mini-offensive operation is continuing, and the only explanation for this operation, as for me, is that it is drawing the attention of the Russian General Staff away from the Kursk direction. After all, they are really harassing our Ukrainian armed forces there. They are advancing into the Sumy region. They have gone approximately 6 kilometers deep. It was necessary to urgently distract them somehow, and this operation was dedicated to this. So far it is working. The Russian Federation is categorically complaining about this operation, Stupak said. He also suggested, citing statements by Russian war correspondents, that the landscape in the Belgorod region plays in Ukraine's favor. There are a certain number of various aeration channels and reservoirs there. If the Ukrainians get through, it will be much more difficult to knock them out than it was in the Kursk region. And besides, there are no gas pipelines in the Belgorod region. That is, it is impossible to repeat this trick with the pipe. Although it is so controversial that it is difficult to say whether it was a successful operation for the Russians or a complete fiasco, Stupak added. Russia's defense ministry has denied claims that Ukraine advanced into its Belgorod Oblast after launching a cross-border incursion, according to independent media outlet Astra. But subsequent reports this week paint a different picture. Ukraine's apparent attempt to invade Russian territory in the Belgorod Oblast came during peace talks with Washington in Saudi Arabia before the agreed ceasefire in the Black Sea. But the fight elsewhere for leverage in further ceasefire talks appears to be continuing, and if Kiev succeeds in gaining a Belgorod foothold, it is hard to see Moscow agreeing a wider peace while Ukrainian troops are in its territory. Citing a Kremlin-affiliated military blogger, the Institute for the Study of War reported on March the 24th that Ukrainian forces had made advances inside Russia near the border villages of Demidovka and Popovka. The Washington-based think tank also cited unconfirmed reports by Russian military bloggers that Moscow had seized Demidovka and Popovka and advanced to the west of Prylyesy. The ISW noted that some military bloggers reported it differently, saying that Ukrainian forces attacked Demidovka and that the southern part of the settlement is a contested grey zone. Due to the increased conflict in the region, Belgorod's governor, Vyacheslav Gladkov, wrote on Telegram that almost all the residents have left the village of Tishanka in the region. He noted that the village is located several kilometers from the border. The operational situation is difficult and that Ukraine has hit residential buildings, destroyed social facilities. The so-called SVO will have grave, far-reaching consequences for Russia. The Russian Federation has demonstrated weakness to all its potential enemies. This was stated by Russian Z-Patriot propagandist Maxim Kalashnikov. The war against Ukraine was not only lost, it became a demonstration that the Russian army is not second in the world. The myth of the military might of the Russian Federation, of the strength of its weapons, collapsed. And this became a gift for potential enemies of the country. The propagandist believes, we have shown a very dangerous weakness, both scientific and technical, military and technical. Do you think the Americans, Chinese and Turks don't see this? They see it very well. They understand it very well. And all the court analysts who try to justify this backwardness are worthless, Kalashnikov said. Earlier, media reported that Igor Strelkov predicted a dark future for the Russian Federation from prison. A perfect storm awaits us. Z-Patriot and war criminal Igor Strelkov, who is serving time in a Russian prison for criticizing Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, has made an alarming forecast for the Russian Federation. He believes that the probability of a perfect storm for the country is high. Strelkov considers reconciliation with the United States very unlikely. However, by trying to do so, the Kremlin could anger China, which would be disastrous for Russia. The information from China was especially alarming. If we manage to move from being friendly neutrals, as China understands it, to being an enemy or simply an unfriendly country, we will get a perfect storm with a probable collapse of statehood. Strelkov wrote, he suspects that the US attempt to establish good relations with Moscow is a ploy. In his opinion, the Americans and Europeans are manipulating Russian dictator Vladimir Putin to squeeze maximum concessions from him in order to end the so-called SVO. I perceive the difference in approaches between the EU and the US towards Russia as a game of good cop, bad cop. One of them is furious and threatening, while the other pats us on the head, says nice things and quite openly flatters, creating the impression in our national leader Vladimir Putin that a compromise is just around the corner. We just need to give in a little, then a little more, then some more. And then it will turn out in the end that there will be nothing left to give in to, Strelkov noted. So, there will be a major attack on Russia, weakened by the war in Ukraine. Russian lands will be divided,